My father looked at his own mother, a woman who had worked her fingers to the bone for 50 years, and pointed to the door. "Get out!" he screamed, his voice cracking with a desperation I had never heard before. It was Christmas Eve in Chicago, and the temperature had dropped to 10 degrees below zero. He was throwing a paralyzed 84-year-old woman and his only daughter out into a blizzard because his new wife wanted a home gym. As the heavy oak door slammed shut in my face, leaving us shivering in the snow, I thought my life was over. I thought we were destitute. I had no idea that the shivering old woman in the wheelchair beside me wasn't just a helpless victim. She was secretly the owner of the very ground my father stood on, and she was worth $3.6 billion. My name is Jasmine, and I am 29 years old. For years, I played the role of the dutiful daughter and the patient caretaker, unaware that my silence was only fueling the monsters in my family. Before I continue this story of cold betrayal and scorching revenge, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. And if you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, hit that like button and subscribe. This story is for anyone who has ever been treated like a burden instead of a blessing. The nightmare began, not with a scream, but with the sharp, deliberate clinking of a fork against fine china. The dining room of my father's colonial mansion was warm, smelling of pine needles and the roast turkey I had spent 6 hours preparing. I was a sous chef at a downtown bistro, and cooking was my love language, my way of trying to buy my father's affection. But as I set the gravy boat down on the lace tablecloth, Jessica, my brother's wife, pinched her nose with 2 manicured fingers. She leaned back in her chair, creating a dramatic distance between herself and my grandmother Hattie, who sat quietly in her wheelchair at the corner of the table. "Raymond," she whined, looking directly at my father. "I am trying to be festive. I really am. But it is impossible to enjoy this expensive turkey when there is that distinct smell of nursing home hovering over the table. Can't we move her to the kitchen?" The room went dead silent. My grandmother, whose left side was paralyzed from a stroke 2 years ago, froze. She slowly lowered her spoon, her hand trembling just enough to make the silverware rattle against the bowl. I felt the heat rise up my neck, a mix of humiliation and protective rage. Grandma Hattie was immaculate. I bathed her every morning. I washed her clothes with lavender detergent. The only thing she smelled like was soap and old paper. "Jessica, that is incredibly rude," I said, my voice shaking. "Grandma is right here. She can hear you, and she smells fine." Jessica rolled her eyes, looking at my brother Trey for support. Trey, the golden child who had never worked a hard day in his life, just shrugged and took a sip of his wine, refusing to meet my gaze. "Don't be so sensitive, Jasmine," Jessica scoffed. "It is a biological fact. Old people have a scent. It makes me nauseous, and you know I have a sensitive stomach." "Raymond, honey, didn't you say we were going to discuss the living arrangements tonight?" I turned to my father. He was sitting at the head of the table wearing a cashmere sweater that cost more than my monthly rent. But he looked terrible. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he kept checking his phone under the table every 30 seconds. I knew he had made some bad investments recently, gambling on high-risk stocks to impress Jessica's wealthy father, but I had no idea how deep the hole was. He needed to assert control, and right now Grandma and I were the easiest targets. "Dad, tell her to stop," I pleaded. "It is Christmas." My father slammed his hand down on the table, making the crystal glasses jump. "Enough, Jasmine. Stop causing drama. Jessica is a guest in this house, and she is right. The situation is untenable." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope. He didn't slide it across the table. He tossed it like it was trash. It landed right in my grandmother's mashed potatoes. "What is this?" I asked, reaching for the envelope. My hands were slick with sweat. "It is a solution," my father said, his voice cold and detached. "I have made arrangements for Mother to be transferred to the State Shady Pines facility. They have a bed open tonight. The ambulance is already on its way to pick her up." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Shady Pines was a warehouse for the forgotten. It was underfunded, dirty, and notorious for neglect. You cannot be serious, I whispered, tearing open the envelope. Inside were involuntary commitment papers already signed by him as her power of attorney. You are putting your own mother in a state home. Dad, she has money. Her pension covers her needs. She can stay here. I take care of her. It costs you nothing. It costs me space, my father roared, standing up. His face was red, a vein bulging in his forehead. Jessica needs that downstairs room for her Pilates studio. We need a home gym. We cannot have a hospital bed in the middle of our first floor anymore. It is depressing. It is killing the property value. You are evicting your mother for a gym, I screamed, standing up to meet him. I looked at Grandma. She hadn't said a word. She was just watching him, her eyes dark and unreadable, studying his face like she was memorizing a stranger. It is done, Jasmine Trey chimed in, his mouth full of stuffing. Just sign the witness line so the ambulance can take her. Don't make it weird. Make it weird. I laughed, a hysterical, broken sound. I grabbed the papers. I looked my father dead in the eye and I ripped them in half. Then I ripped them again. I threw the confetti of legal jargon into the air. No, I said firmly. She is not going anywhere. If she goes, I go. And I will sue you for elder abuse. Something inside my father snapped. The stress of his secret debts, the pressure from his new wife, the defiance of his daughter, it all boiled over into blind rage. He marched around the table. He didn't grab me. He grabbed the handles of Grandma's wheelchair. You want to go, fine. Go, both of you. Get out of my house. He began pushing the wheelchair violently toward the front door. Jessica was smirking, sipping her wine, as if this were a reality TV show. Trey just looked down at his plate. Dad, stop! You are hurting her, I screamed, chasing after them. Dad, it is 10 below zero outside. He didn't listen. He threw the front door open. The wind howled instantly, blowing snow into the grand foyer. He shoved the wheelchair over the threshold. The front wheels caught on the ice and the chair nearly tipped over. I lunged forward to catch Grandma just in time. My father grabbed my arm and shoved me out onto the porch after her. He reached back inside and grabbed the small battered suitcase that contained Grandma's clothes. He threw it into a snowbank. Don't come back until you learn your place, he spat. And take your trash with you. The heavy door slammed shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the frozen air. I heard the deadbolt slide into place. Click. I stood there in my thin dress, the cold instantly biting into my skin. The snow was falling so hard I could barely see the streetlights. I looked down at Grandma. She was wearing only a thin cardigan over her blouse. I immediately took off my coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, tucking it around her frail legs. Grandma, I am so sorry, I sobbed, my teeth chattering. I am so sorry. I expected her to cry. I expected her to panic. But when Hattie looked up at me, there were no tears in her eyes. The confusion I had seen for the last few years was gone. In its place was a look of cold, hard steel. She reached out and patted my frozen hand. Don't cry, baby girl, she said, her voice stronger than I had heard in a decade. Crying is for people who have no options, and we have plenty. I didn't know what she meant. I thought she was delirious from the cold. I grabbed the handles of her wheelchair and began to push my boots, slipping on the ice, heading toward the main road to find shelter, unaware that the woman I was pushing held the keys to the entire city in her pocket. The war had just begun, and my father had just made the most expensive mistake of his life. The wind in Chicago does not just blow, it bites. It tears through fabric and skin with the ferocity of a wild animal, and that night the wind seemed to have a personal vendetta against me. As the heavy door of my childhood home clicked shut, sealing us out, the silence that followed was heavier than the storm. For a moment, I just stood there, paralyzed not by the cold, but by the sheer magnitude of what had just happened. My father, the man who had taught me how to ride a bike on this very driveway, had just thrown me into a blizzard. I looked down at Grandma Hattie. The wool blanket I had tucked around her was already gathering a layer of white frost. She was gripping the armrests of her wheelchair so tightly that her knuckles were visible even through her thin gloves. I scrambled off the porch, my boots slipping on the ice-coated steps, and ran toward the snowbank where my father had tossed her suitcase. It was humiliating, there is no other word for it. I was on my hands and knees in the snow digging frantically for her belongings. The suitcase had popped open upon impact, scattering the meager possessions of an 84-year-old woman across the driveway. I grabbed a handful of her compression socks that were soaking up the slush. I found her Bible, its leather cover now wet and cold, half buried near the mailbox. Every item I retrieved felt like a piece of my heart breaking. I was shaking not just from the sub-zero temperature, but from a rage so hot it felt like it could melt the ice beneath me. I shoved the wet clothes back into the suitcase and dragged it toward the wheelchair. That is when I felt eyes on me. A prickling sensation on the back of my neck that made me turn around. There, framed in the large bay window of the living room, stood Jessica. The golden light from the chandelier behind her created a halo, making the room look like the warmest, most inviting place on earth. She was holding a glass of red wine, the crystal catching the light. She wasn't looking at her husband or the Christmas tree. She was looking right at me. And she was smiling. It wasn't a broad, evil laugh. It was worse. It was a small, pitying smirk, the kind you give to a stray dog, that you are glad isn't your problem anymore. She raised her glass slightly in a mock toast, a silent farewell to the trash she had finally taken out. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pick up a rock and shatter that window, to shatter her perfect stolen life. But I couldn't. I had a paralyzed woman to save. I turned my back on the warmth I had paid for with years of obedience and grabbed the handles of the wheelchair. "We have to move, Grandma," I said, my voice barely audible over the howling wind. "We have to get to the main road. An Uber will be easier to find there." Pushing a wheelchair through 2 inches of fresh snow is a nightmare I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. The wheels acted like plows, gathering resistance with every step. My calves burned. My lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass every time I inhaled the freezing air. We trudged down the long driveway, the majestic houses of our neighbors looming on either side, like silent, indifferent giants. Everyone was inside, celebrating, safe in their bubbles of wealth and family, completely unaware that 2 people were fighting for survival just yards away. When we finally reached the corner of the street, under the flickering light of a street lamp, I pulled out my phone. My fingers were so numb I could barely unlock the screen. I opened the Uber app, my vision blurring from the snow sticking to my eyelashes. I requested a ride, the price surging due to the holiday and the weather. I didn't care. I would pay anything to get Grandma into a warm car. Confirming ride. The processing circle spun. Then a notification popped up in bright red letters. Payment method declined. I frowned, wiping the screen. That was impossible. I had just been paid yesterday. I tried again. Declined. Panic began to rise in my chest, cold and sharp. I switched to the hotel booking app, trying to reserve a room at the nearest Holiday Inn. Declined. Insufficient funds. I opened my banking app, my heart hammering against my ribs. I logged in, expecting to see my balance of $12,000, my savings, my safety net. Instead, I saw a zero. Zero. And then I remembered. Years ago, my father had convinced me to merge my accounts with the family trust for tax benefits. He said it would help us build generational wealth. He said it was what families do. I had trusted him. I had deposited every paycheck from the restaurant into that account, thinking I was building a future. He hadn't just evicted us. He had robbed me. While we were arguing at the dinner table, or perhaps while I was packing my bags, he or Jessica had accessed the main dashboard and locked me out. They had cut off my access to my own money. We were stranded in a blizzard with $11 in cash in my pocket and a maxed-out credit card. "Dad, how could you?" I whispered to the empty street. The betrayal hit me harder than the wind. He knew I had nowhere to go. He knew I had Grandma. He wanted us to crawl back. He wanted us broken so completely that we would accept the nursing home just to survive. Jasmine. Grandma's voice came from the chair. It was weak, carried away by the wind. Why have we stopped? I quickly shoved the phone into my pocket, blinking back tears that were threatening to freeze on my cheeks. Nothing. Grandma, just waiting for the signal. We are going to walk a bit further. The reception is bad here. I lied. I couldn't tell her we were destitute. I couldn't tell her that her son was a thief. I gripped the handles again, my determination hardening into something brittle and dangerous. I would push her all the way to downtown if I had to. I would walk until my feet bled before I knocked on that door again. We moved forward, the snow getting deeper, as the plows hadn't come through yet. The sidewalk was uneven, hidden beneath the white blanket. I was exhausted, my body running on adrenaline and spite. I didn't see the crack in the pavement. I didn't see the patch of black ice that had formed over the tree root buckling the concrete. The front left caster of the wheelchair hit the obstruction hard. There was a sickening metallic snap. The chair lurched violently to the left. The rusted metal of the old wheelchair weakened by years of use, and the extreme cold simply gave up. The front wheel sheared off completely. No, I screamed, lunging forward. Gravity was faster than I was. The wheelchair tipped. I threw my body between the chair and the pavement, catching the handle with my shoulder to break the fall, but the momentum was too much. We went down. Grandma slid sideways, the seatbelt holding her in, but her frail body dangling precariously close to the ice. I slammed my knee into the concrete, a jolt of agony shooting up my leg, but I didn't let go of her. Grandma! I scrambled up, ignoring the pain in my leg, and grabbed her, pulling her upright. The wheelchair was useless. It sat there in the snow, looking like a broken insect listing heavily to one side. We were 3 miles from the nearest shelter. My phone was at 4% battery. My money was stolen, and now our only means of transportation lay shattered on the ice. The wind howled around us, mocking my failure. I looked at Grandma, snow accumulating on her eyelashes, her face pale as a sheet. We were trapped in the middle of the storm, and for the first time in my life, I didn't just feel alone. I felt hunted. The journey to the motel was a blur of freezing slush and physical agony that I will never forget. With the front wheel of the wheelchair sheared off, I had to tilt the entire metal frame backward, balancing Grandma Hattie's weight on the 2 large rear tires, like I was pushing a dolly loaded with fragile cargo. Every crack in the sidewalk sent a shockwave through my arms, and every gust of wind threatened to blow us over. By the time the flickering neon sign of the Motel 6 came into view, buzzing loudly against the dark sky, I couldn't feel my toes anymore. It was the only place on the highway that I knew might accept cash without a reservation. A place where people went when they wanted to disappear, or when they had nowhere else to go. I left Grandma under the awning, shielded slightly from the biting wind, and stepped into the lobby. The heat hit me like a physical blow, making my frozen skin sting. The night clerk was a man with grease stains on his shirt, watching a game show on a small television behind bulletproof glass. He didn't look up when I walked in, dripping wet and shivering violently. I placed my crumpled bills on the counter, smoothing them out with trembling fingers. $11. I prayed it was enough for a few hours, just enough to keep us from freezing to death until morning. The clerk looked at the money, then at me, his eyes lingering on my expensive dress that was now ruined by mud and salt. He didn't ask questions. He just slid a key across the metal tray and muttered a room number. It was the transaction of the desperate. Room 104 was located around the back, facing the highway. The door stuck swollen from the dampness, and I had to throw my shoulder against it to force it open. The smell hit us immediately. It was a stale cocktail of old cigarette smoke, industrial cleaner, and damp carpet. The room was small and dim, illuminated by a single flickering bulb in the corner. The wallpaper was peeling near the ceiling, and the radiator clanked loudly, struggling to produce heat. But it was shelter. I wheeled Grandma inside and locked the door, sliding the chain latch into place, as if that flimsy piece of metal could protect us from the monsters outside. I helped Grandma out of the chair and onto the bed. The bedspread had a cigarette burn near the pillow, but the sheets looked clean enough. I took off her wet shoes and began rubbing her feet, trying to bring the circulation back. My own hands were red and raw, but I didn't care. I felt a crushing weight of guilt settling in my chest, heavier than the snow outside. I was supposed to protect her. I was 29 years old, a grown woman, and I had allowed my father to throw us away like garbage. I looked at Hattie sitting there in her mismatched layers, her silver hair disheveled, and I broke. I slid to the floor, burying my face in the scratchy blanket covering her knees. The sobs came out of me in jagged, ugly gasps. "I am so sorry, Grandma," I cried, my voice muffled by the fabric. "I failed you. I don't know what to do. I have no money. I have no car. He took everything. We are going to die out here." I waited for her to pat my head, to offer some confused, senile comfort like she usually did. But she didn't move. She sat perfectly still. The silence in the room stretched out, filled only by the hum of the mini-fridge and the rushing cars on the highway. I wiped my eyes and looked up at her. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking around the room, her eyes scanning the peeling paint, the broken lock on the window, the water stains on the ceiling. It wasn't the look of a frightened old woman. It was the look of a building inspector surveying a demolition site. There was a sharpness in her gaze that I hadn't seen in years, a clarity that sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Before I could ask her what was wrong, the silence was shattered by a jarring electronic sound. My phone. I pulled it out of my pocket. The screen was cracked from when I fell, but the name flashing on the display was clear. Dad. My stomach lurched. Part of me wanted to throw the phone against the wall, but fear paralyzed me. What if he was calling to say it was a mistake? What if he was coming to get us? Desperation makes you hope for things that are impossible. I swiped right and put it on speaker, my hand shaking so hard the phone rattled against the bedside table. Dad, I whispered, hating how small my voice sounded. Jasmine Raymond's voice filled the small room, distorted by the static but dripping with that familiar arrogance. I assume you have realized by now how stupid you were to walk out. It is negative 15 degrees out there. I hope you are enjoying the consequences of your disrespect. We are at a motel. Dad, I said, trying to steady my voice. Grandma is safe. Why are you doing this? Please just unlock my bank account. I need to buy her food. There was a pause, and then I heard a sound that made my blood boil. The sound of ice clinking against glass. He was drinking. He was warm, comfortable, and drinking scotch while his mother sat in a motel room that smelled like ash. I am not unlocking anything until you learn to cooperate, Raymond said smoothly. In fact, I am calling to give you a heads up. I have a realtor meeting me at the South Side house tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. We are listing it for a quick cash sale. A developer wants the land. They are going to bulldoze that rotting heap by next week. My heart stopped. The South Side house. It was the small two-bedroom bungalow where Grandma had raised my father. It was where I had spent my summers. It was filled with memories, with history. It was the only thing Hattie had left in her name, or so I thought. You can't do that, I shouted, standing up. That is Grandma's house. It has been in the family for 50 years. You cannot just sell it to a developer. Watch me, he sneered. I have the power of attorney, remember? Or at least I will once you sign the addendum I emailed you. And if you don't show up tomorrow morning to sign it, I am calling the police. I will tell them you kidnapped a vulnerable adult. I will tell them you took my mother from her home against medical advice and dragged her into a blizzard. You will go to jail, Jasmine, and she will go to the state home anyway. So do we have a deal? The cruelty was breathtaking. He had planned this. He was using the police, the system, and his own mother as leverage to cover his debts. He was going to erase our entire history for a quick check. I felt the walls closing in. I was trapped. If I refused, I went to jail. If I agreed, he won. Dad, please. I begged, tears streaming down my face again. Don't do this. That house is all she has. It is a tear down, Jasmine. It is garbage, just like that attitude of yours. You have until 8 a.m. Bring her to the house, sign the papers, and maybe I will let you have your car keys back. I opened my mouth to scream, to curse him, to beg. I didn't even know what I was going to do. But suddenly a hand reached out. It was a hand covered in liver spots and thin, papery skin, but the grip was surprisingly firm. Grandma Hattie reached over and grabbed my wrist. I looked down at her, startled. Her head was held high. Her posture had changed completely. She wasn't slumped over anymore. Her chin was lifted, her jaw set in a line of granite. The fog of age and infirmity had vanished from her eyes, replaced by a burning, terrifying intelligence. She didn't look at me. She looked at the phone glowing on the bedside table. She took a deep breath, and when she spoke, the voice that came out wasn't the weak, tremulous whisper of the grandmother I had been caring for. It was a voice of command. It was a voice of authority. It was a voice that could crack a whip. "Give me the phone," she said. I stared at her, frozen. Hattie didn't wait. She reached out and took the device from my stunned fingers. She held it up to her mouth, her eyes narrowing as she visualized the son who had just condemned her to freeze. "Raymond," she said, her voice cutting through the static like a razor blade. There was silence on the other end. Total stunned silence. My father hadn't heard his mother speak with that kind of clarity in 5 years. "Mom," he stammered, sounding suddenly like a frightened child. "Listen to me very carefully, Raymond," she said, her tone low and dangerous. "You will not be meeting any realtor tomorrow. You will not be selling my house. And you will certainly not be calling the police." "Mom, you are confused." Raymond tried to regain his composure, his voice rising nervously. "You don't understand the financial reality. I understand more than you could ever imagine, you ungrateful, greedy little boy." She snapped, the insult landing with the weight of a gavel. "You think you hold the cards. You think you have the power because you stole a few $1,000s from your daughter. You have no idea who you are dealing with." She paused, letting the fear sink in on the other end of the line. "You want to talk about assets, Raymond? Let's talk about assets. But we are not going to do it over the phone. I am coming for you. And when I am done, you will wish you had left me in the snow." She tapped the red button, ending the call with a finality that made me jump. She tossed the phone onto the bedspread and turned to me. The transformation was complete. The frailty was gone, replaced by a terrifying calm. "Jasmine," she said, pointing to her battered suitcase. "Open the lining in the bottom. There is a Nokia phone stitched inside. Get it. We have a call to make. And wipe your face. We don't have time for tears. We have an empire to reclaim." I stared at the ancient Nokia phone resting in the palm of my hand. It was a relic from another era, heavy and brick-like, hidden beneath the lining of my grandmother's suitcase, like a piece of contraband. For a moment, I just looked at it, confused by the weight of it and the absurdity of the situation. The storm was raging outside, rattling the thin window pane of our motel room, and my father's cruel ultimatum was still ringing in my ears. Yet here was Hattie, the woman I had bathed and fed for years, looking at this piece of plastic as if it were a weapon of mass destruction. "Hand it to me, Jasmine," she said again. Her voice was steady, stripping away the last remnants of the frail old woman I thought I knew. I placed the phone in her hand. I expected the battery to be dead after sitting in a suitcase for who knows how long, but Hattie pressed the power button, and the small monochromatic screen flickered to life with a bright green glow. Full battery. She didn't hesitate. Her fingers, which I had watched tremble over a spoon of soup just hours ago, moved with the dexterity of a concert pianist. She punched in a sequence of numbers that was far too long to be a standard telephone number. She held the device to her ear, her eyes fixed on the peeling wallpaper across the room. I sat on the edge of the bed, hugging my knees, terrified that the stress of the eviction had finally caused her to snap. I prepared myself to comfort her when no one answered, or when she started talking to a dial tone. But then she spoke. "Eagle 1 to command," she said. Her tone was clipped, professional, and terrifyingly cold. "Identify Alpha 01. My mouth fell open. I watched in stunned silence as she paused, listening to a voice on the other end that I couldn't hear. She nodded once, her jaw set. Code red. She stated the words, dropping into the silence of the room like lead weights. Reactivate Phoenix Protocol immediately. I have been compromised. Location is the Motel 6 off Interstate 94. Exit 32. I need a full extraction team. You have 20 minutes. She lowered the phone and pressed the end call button with a decisive click. Then she placed it gently on the nightstand next to the Gideon Bible. She turned to me, and for the first time that night, a small, genuine smile touched her lips. It wasn't the vacant smile of the grandmother I knew. It was the smirk of a woman who had just checkmated an opponent who didn't even know he was playing the game. "Grandma," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Who did you just call?" "What is the Phoenix Protocol?" Hattie sighed, shifting in the bed. She reached out and took my hand, her grip warm and strong. "Jasmine, there are things about me that I have kept buried for a very long time. Things I had to hide to protect this family, and eventually to protect myself from them." "But you are sick," I stammered. "The stroke, the paralysis." "I had a stroke, yes," she admitted. 5 years ago. It was mild. I recovered about 90% of my mobility within 6 months. I stared at her, my mind reeling. 6 months? But I have been lifting you in and out of bed for 5 years. I have been pushing that chair. I have been cutting your food. "I know," she said softly, her eyes filling with a sudden sadness. "And every time you did, every time you wiped my face or read to me when you were too tired to keep your eyes open, you were proving something to me. You were proving that you loved Hattie the person, not Hattie the bank account." "I don't understand," I said, feeling a mix of relief and betrayal. "Why would you pretend? Why would you let Dad treat you like a burden if you could walk? Why let him scream at you?" "Because I needed to know," she said, her voice hardening. "When your grandfather died, he left us with more than just that little house on the south side. He left an empire, Jasmine. But money is like poison to a weak soul. I watched your father grow up. I watched him become greedy. I watched him become entitled. When I got sick, I saw a flicker of something dark in his eyes. He didn't see a mother who needed help. He saw an obstacle to his inheritance." She squeezed my hand tighter. "So I decided to test them. I decided to play the part of the helpless invalid. I wanted to see who would stand by me when I had nothing to offer but my company. I wanted to see if my son would care for me out of love, or if he would wait for me to die like a vulture circling a carcass." She looked toward the door, her expression darkening. "I gave Raymond 5 years. 5 years to show me 1 ounce of compassion. 5 years to prove he was a man. Tonight, when he threw us out into the snow, he failed the final exam. He didn't just fail Jasmine, he declared war." My head was spinning. The woman sitting before me wasn't just my grandmother. She was a strategist. She had endured 5 years of humiliation, of being talked down to by Jessica, of being ignored by Trey just to measure the content of their characters. And I was the only one who had passed. "So the money," I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The house." "The house is just a prop," she said dismissively. "I own the block. I own the building Raymond works in. I own the hotel we are about to check into. And as of tomorrow morning, I am going to remind your father exactly who pays his salary." She sat up straighter, smoothing down her disheveled cardigan. "Now help me with my hair. I refuse to let my security team see me looking like a refugee." We spent the next 15 minutes in a surreal state. I combed her hair with my fingers, trying to make her presentable while my mind raced with a million questions. I looked at this woman, this secret billionaire in a Motel 6, and I felt a surge of pride so intense it almost brought me to my knees. We weren't victims. We were wolves in sheep's clothing, and the sheep had just made a fatal mistake. Exactly 20 minutes after the call, the room was illuminated by blinding white lights cutting through the thin curtains. The hum of powerful engines vibrated through the floorboards. I walked to the window and peered through the crack in the drapes. My breath caught in my throat. The desolate, snow-covered parking lot of the motel had been transformed into a scene from a presidential motorcade. 3 massive black Cadillac Escalades were parked in a precision formation right outside our door. The vehicles were pristine, their polished paint gleaming under the harsh motel lights, a stark contrast to the rusted sedans and pickup trucks parked nearby. As I watched, the doors of the vehicles opened in perfect synchronization. 6 men stepped out. They were giants wearing immaculate black suits and long wool coats despite the freezing wind. They wore earpieces and moved with a fluidity that screamed military training. They didn't look like chauffeurs. They looked like a private army. The night clerk, the man with the grease stains who had barely looked at me earlier, was now standing in the doorway of the lobby, his mouth hanging open, his game show forgotten. The lead security officer, a man with broad shoulders and a shaved head, approached our door. He didn't bang on it. He knocked 3 times, precise and firm. "Open it, Jasmine," Hattie said. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She looked regal even in her old clothes. I unlocked the door and swung it open. The cold air rushed in, but it didn't feel biting anymore. It felt like the winds of change. The lead officer stepped into the doorway. He took in the shabby room, the peeling paint, and me standing there in my ruined dress. His expression remained stoic, but his eyes softened slightly when they landed on Hattie. He removed his leather gloves and bowed his head, a gesture of profound respect. "Madam President," he said, his voice deep and resonant, "we have secured the perimeter. The suite at the Ritz is prepared. We are ready to take you home." Hattie nodded slowly. "Thank you, Marcus. It is good to see you." She looked at me and then down at the broken wheelchair in the corner of the room. "Leave it," she commanded. "We won't be needing that anymore." Marcus signaled to the other men. 2 of them stepped forward ready to assist, but Hattie waved them off. With a grunt of effort, she pushed herself up from the bed. My instinct was to rush to help her, but she held up a hand. She stood on her own 2 feet, shaky but determined. She took 1 step, then another, walking toward the door on her own terms for the first time in half a decade. As we walked out into the swirling snow, flanked by our protective detail, I looked back at the motel room one last time. We were leaving behind the poverty, the fear, and the helplessness. We were stepping into a new reality. I climbed into the back of the warm leather interior of the lead SUV, sitting next to the woman who had just rewritten our destiny. As the convoy pulled away, leaving the motel in the rearview mirror, I knew one thing for certain. Raymond thought he had thrown away trash. He was about to find out he had thrown away the bank. The silence inside the armored Cadillac Escalade was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked away the howling wind and the chaos of the night, leaving only the soft hum of climate control and the smell of rich leather. I sat there, my hands still red and raw from the cold, clutching the seatbelt like a lifeline. Next to me, Grandma Hattie stared out the tinted window as the city of Chicago blurred past. We were no longer moving through the city as victims. We were gliding through it like predators in the dark. 10 minutes later, the convoy pulled into the private underground entrance of the Four Seasons Hotel. I had walked past this building 1,000 times on my way to culinary school, looking up at its towering glass facade and wondering what life was like for the people inside. Tonight, I didn't have to wonder. A team of staff was waiting for us by the elevator, their heads bowed in deference. They didn't look at my muddy boots or my ruined dress. They looked only at Hattie, treating her with the reverence usually reserved for royalty or heads of state. We ascended 50 floors in seconds. When the doors slid open to the presidential suite, I literally stopped breathing. The room was larger than the entire house I had just been evicted from. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the frozen city below, the lights twinkling like diamonds scattered on black velvet. A fire was already roaring in a marble fireplace that was big enough to stand in. Hattie didn't gasp. She didn't marvel at the opulence. She simply walked over to the fireplace, leaning on her cane, and warmed her hands. "Harrison," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast room. I want room service, lobster bisque, a medium rare ribeye, and a bottle of the 1996 Cabernet. And get Jasmine some clothes that don't smell like a Motel 6. A man in a sharp gray suit who had been waiting in the shadows of the suite stepped forward. This was Harrison, the lawyer I had seen earlier. He nodded efficiently. Already done, Madam President. The stylist is waiting in the guest wing. I stood there feeling like an imposter in my own life. Grandma? I whispered, approaching her slowly. This place costs $10,000 a night. How are we paying for this? Hattie turned to me. The firelight danced in her eyes, making them look fierce and young. We are not paying for it, Jasmine. We own it. I blinked, sure I had misheard. You own the suite? No, darling. She smiled, a small, dangerous curve of her lips. I own the hotel. Before I could process that impossible statement, Harrison cleared his throat. He walked over to the massive mahogany dining table and placed a silver briefcase on top of it. The click of the latch's opening sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Ms. Jasmine Harrison said, his tone serious and professional. It is time you understood the scope of what we are dealing with. Your grandmother, Hattie Mae Brooks, is the sole beneficiary and chairperson of the Pegasus Trust. He spread a large map of downtown Chicago across the table. It was color-coded. Huge swaths of the city were highlighted in blue. Every building you see in blue belongs to the trust, Harrison explained, tracing his finger along the famous skyline. The office tower your father works in, blue. The shopping district where Jessica buys her designer bags, blue. The medical center where you were born, blue. I stared at the map, my knees shaking. It wasn't just a few properties. It was an empire. The total valuation of the portfolio as of the market close this afternoon is $3.6 billion, Harrison stated calmly, as if he were discussing the weather. And that does not include the liquid assets in the offshore accounts. $3.6 billion. The number was so big, it felt abstract. I looked at Hattie. She was just an old woman in a cardigan a few hours ago. Now she was a titan. But why, I asked, my voice trembling. Why live in that little house on the south side? Why let Dad treat you like that? Because comfort breeds weakness, Hattie said, sitting down at the head of the table. And I needed to know if my son was a man or a leech. I got my answer tonight. She gestured for Harrison to continue. Show her the rest, Harrison. Show her why Raymond was so desperate to kick me out tonight. Harrison pulled another document from the briefcase. It was a property deed. I recognized the address immediately. It was the address of the colonial mansion in the suburbs, the house where I grew up, the house where Raymond and Jessica were currently sleeping warm and smug. You think that is your father's house? Harrison asked gently. I nodded. He talks about it all the time. He says he built it. He says it is his legacy. Harrison shook his head. It is a lie. That house is owned by a shell company called HM Holdings. Hattie Mae Holdings. Your father has never owned it. He has been allowed to live there rent-free for 20 years as a kindness from your grandmother. He is a tenant, Jasmine, a tenant at will. My jaw dropped. The arrogance, the pride, the way Raymond lorded that house over everyone, it was all fake. He was a squatter in a mansion funded by the very woman he called a burden. But that is not the worst part, Harrison said, his voice dropping an octave. He pulled out a final document. It was a loan application from a private lender. A predatory lender, the kind that breaks kneecaps when you don't pay. Your father is in deep gambling debt, Harrison explained. He owes $4 million to some very dangerous people. Last week he tried to mortgage the mansion to pay them off. But he can't mortgage a house he doesn't own, I said, confused. Exactly, Harrison said. Unless he forges the owner's signature. He slid a piece of paper toward me. It was a power of attorney document authorizing the mortgage. At the bottom was a signature, Hattie M. Brooks. I looked at the signature, then at my grandmother. I didn't sign that, Hattie said coldly. He forged it, I whispered, the realization making me nauseous. He committed a felony. He did, Harrison confirmed. And the lender accepted it. The funds were released to him yesterday. But here is the catch. The terms of the loan require the property to be occupied by the borrower. That is why he needed to get rid of Hattie. If the lender found out the actual owner was living there and disputing the title, the loan would be called in immediately. He evicted us to cover up a crime, I said, anger replacing my shock. He evicted us because he is desperate, Hattie corrected. And desperate men make mistakes. Harrison checked his watch. The lender he used has a clause. If there is any discrepancy in the title or occupancy, the loan enters default within 48 hours. So what does that mean for him, I asked. Hattie leaned forward, the firelight casting long shadows across her face. It means, my dear granddaughter, that we don't have to sue him. We don't have to fight him. We just have to make one phone call to the lender and tell them the truth. When we do that, the loan is revoked. The money he already spent to pay his gambling debts becomes due immediately. She picked up a grape from the fruit bowl and popped it into her mouth. He has 48 hours, Jasmine. 48 hours before he loses the money, the house, and his freedom, and he thinks we are freezing in a Motel 6. She turned to Harrison. Prepare the audit, Harrison. I want every penny he stole tracked. And get the car ready for tomorrow morning. We aren't going to the police station. We are going to the gala. I think it is time the tenant met the landlord. I looked out the window at the city below. Somewhere out there, my father was sleeping soundly, thinking he had won. He had no idea that the timer had already started and the avalanche was coming. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of the penthouse suite, looking down at the glittering lights of Chicago. My hand was gripping my phone so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. The anger inside me was a physical thing, a burning knot in my chest that demanded release. I turned back to the room where my grandmother sat calmly sipping a cup of herbal tea. We need to call the police right now, I said, my voice shaking with adrenaline. We have the proof, Grandma. Harrison showed us the forged documents. Raymond committed fraud. He stole from you. He threw us out into a blizzard. If we call 911, they will arrest him tonight. I want to see him in handcuffs. I want to see Jessica cry as they drag him away. Hattie set her teacup down on the saucer with a gentle clink. The sound was incredibly loud in the quiet luxury of the room. She looked at me, her eyes clear and sharp, devoid of the confusion she had feigned for so long. Sit down, Jasmine, she said softly. But Grandma, he is getting away with it, I protested, pacing across the plush carpet. Every minute we wait is a minute he thinks he won. I said sit down, she repeated. Her voice didn't rise, but the command was absolute. It was the voice of a woman who had run a billion-dollar empire from the shadows. I stopped pacing and sat on the edge of the velvet sofa opposite her. Hattie leaned forward, resting her hands on her cane. You are thinking like a victim, Jasmine, she said. A victim wants immediate relief. A victim wants the bad man to go away. But I need you to think like a CEO. I need you to think like a general. She gestured to the city below us. If we arrest him tonight, what happens? He gets booked. He calls Jessica's wealthy father to post bail. He hires a slimy defense attorney who spins a story about how he was just trying to manage his senile mother's assets because she was mentally incompetent. He plays the martyr. He tells the world he was the dutiful son trying to save the family estate from a greedy daughter. The legal battle drags on for years. He stays in that house. He keeps his reputation. I stared at her. I hadn't thought about that. Raymond was a master manipulator. He could twist anything. So what do we do? I asked. Let him get away with it. No. Hattie smiled, and it was a cold, terrifying expression. We don't just want to stop him. We want to destroy him. We want to make sure that when he falls, there is no safety net to catch him. We want to burn his reputation so thoroughly that not even a McDonald's would hire him to flip burgers. She pointed to the calendar on the tablet Harrison had left on the table. Tomorrow night is the Winter Gala. Raymond has been talking about this for months. He is planning to announce his merger with Jessica's father's company. He is going to stand on a stage in front of the city's elite, the investors, the press, and claim that he is the heir to the Brooks legacy. He is going to climb to the very top of the mountain tomorrow night. She leaned back, her eyes gleaming. And that is when we push him off. Public humiliation, Jasmine. Irrefutable proof shown to the very people he is trying to impress. When we are done, he won't just be a criminal. He will be a pariah. I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was brutal. It was calculated. And it was brilliant. Harrison the lawyer stepped back into the room. He was carrying a fresh stack of files. "Madam President," he said, "we have completed the forensic audit of your son's personal accounts. It is worse than we thought." "How much?" Hattie asked. Harrison handed a tablet to me. I looked at the screen and gasped. The numbers were staggering. "He is not just in debt to the loan sharks," Harrison explained. "He has been siphoning money from Jessica's accounts too. He created fake invoices for home renovations that never happened. If she finds out, she will divorce him before the handcuffs are even on." "And Trey?" I asked, dreading the answer. My brother had been cruel, but he was still my little brother. Harrison swiped to the next page. "Trey has a gambling problem too, but it is sports betting and crypto scams. He owes 6 figures to bookies in Vegas. That is why he is so desperate for the house to be sold. Raymond promised him a cut of the sale to clear his debts." I lowered the tablet. It all made sense now. The cruelty, the rush to evict us, the desperation in Raymond's eyes. They weren't just mean, they were drowning. They needed Hattie's money like oxygen. "Good," Hattie said, nodding with satisfaction. "Desperate men are predictable. They will be at that gala tomorrow, confident that the house sale is going through. They will be celebrating." She turned to me. "Jasmine, for years you have been a sous chef. You have taken orders. You have stayed in the background. That ends tonight." She picked up a heavy fountain pen and slid a document toward me. "This is the charter for the Hattie Mae Foundation. It controls over $500 million in charitable assets. I am appointing you as the interim executive director effective immediately." My hands shook as I reached for the pen. "Grandma, I don't know if I can do this. I cook food. I don't run foundations." "You have integrity," Hattie said firmly. "You have a heart. Those are the only 2 things you cannot teach. The rest, you hire people like Harrison to handle the math. Sign it." I looked at the paper. I looked at the woman who believed in me when my own father didn't. I took a deep breath, gripped the pen, and signed my name. The ink was dark and permanent. As I finished the signature, I felt something shift inside me. The scared girl who had been thrown out in the snow was fading. A new Jasmine was taking her place. Just then, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up with a notification. It was a text message. I glanced at it and my blood ran cold. It was from Jessica. I picked up the phone and read the message aloud, my voice dripping with disbelief. "Hey Jasmine," the text read. "I heard you are staying at a cheap motel. Tough break. Look, the catering service for the gala tomorrow just had a dishwasher quit. If you want to make some quick cash, I can get you in. $50 an hour to wash dishes and clear tables. But you have to wear a uniform and stay in the kitchen. I don't want you embarrassing Raymond in front of his partners. And don't bring the old lady." I looked up at Hattie, fury rising in my throat. The audacity. She wanted me to scrub plates at the very party where my father was celebrating stealing my inheritance. "I am going to tell her to go to hell." I spat, my thumbs hovering over the keyboard. Hattie reached out and covered my hand with hers. "No," she said. Her smile was back, and this time it was predatory. "Tell her yes." What I asked, shocked. "You want me to wash dishes for them?" "I want you inside that building," Hattie said. "I want you to be the Trojan horse. If you go as a guest, they will stop you at the door. But the help, nobody looks at the help. Nobody suspects the help. You will have access to everything, the microphones, the projector, the back office." She tapped the screen of my phone. "Take the job, Jasmine. Let them treat you like a servant one last time. Let them think they have won. Because when you walk out of that kitchen tomorrow night, you won't be clearing the table. You will be flipping it over. I looked at the text message again. $50 an hour to wash away their sins. I started to type, "Sure, Jessica. I really need the money. I will be there." I hit send. The trap was set, and they had just invited their executioner right through the front door. The service entrance of the mansion was located near the garbage bins, a detail I had never paid much attention to when I lived here as a daughter. But tonight, walking through the slush in a borrowed catering uniform that was 2 sizes too big, I felt the symbolism weigh heavily on my shoulders. I was no longer Jasmine, the family member. I was Jasmine, the hired help, sneaking into my own home like a thief in the night. In my pocket, I carried not a weapon, but a small, high-definition recording device disguised as a pen given to me by Harrison's security team. I knocked on the heavy steel door. It swung open to reveal Jessica looking radiant and terrifying in a silk dressing gown. She didn't say hello. She just looked me up and down, her lips curling in that familiar, condescending smirk. "You are late," she snapped, stepping back to let me in. "The kitchen is a mess. The caterers are setting up in the dining room, but I need you to scrub the floor in the foyer before the guests arrive. And for God's sake, pull your hair back. You look like a stray cat." I kept my head down, swallowing the retort that was burning on my tongue. "Yes, ma'am," I mumbled, walking past her. The air inside smelled of expensive perfume and impending disaster. As I made my way to the utility closet to get the mop, I passed my brother Trey. He was lounging in the hallway texting on his phone, already dressed in his tuxedo. When he saw me, he actually laughed out loud. "Wow, look at you," he jeered, blocking my path. "From sous chef to janitor. That is quite a career pivot, sis." I guess Dad was right. You really don't have any ambition. I gripped the handle of the mop bucket, my knuckles turning white. "I am just here to work, Trey. Let me pass." He didn't move. Instead, he extended his foot, tapping the toe of his patent leather dress shoe against my shin. "Actually, while you are down there, my shoes got a little scuffed on the way in. Give them a quick shine, would you? There is a rag in the bucket." I looked at him, searching for a shred of the little brother I used to help with homework. I saw nothing but a hollow, entitled stranger. Slowly I knelt, not out of submission but strategy, as I wiped the non-existent dust from his shoes. I slipped the recording pen from my pocket and slid it under the hallway console table, right where Raymond always took his private calls. There I said, standing up, shiny as a new dime. "Good girl." Trey chuckled, patting me on the head like a dog. "Now get to the foyer. It smells like wet dog in there." I spent the next hour scrubbing floors that were already clean and polishing silver that was already shining. Every degrading command from Jessica, every snide comment from Raymond as he breezed past me without even making eye contact, only added fuel to the fire burning inside me. They thought they were breaking me. They had no idea they were sharpening me. When the clock struck 5, chaos erupted in the kitchen. The catering staff was overwhelmed, and Jessica was screaming at the head chef about the canapes. This was my chance. I knew Raymond's routine. He always kept his most important documents in the wall safe in his study, and at 5:30, he would be in the shower getting ready for the gala. I slipped away from the kitchen, moving silent as a ghost through the service corridors I knew by heart. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. If they caught me now, it wasn't just about being fired. It was about losing the element of surprise. I reached the study and gently turned the handle, unlocked. Raymond was arrogant. He never thought anyone would dare enter his sanctuary. I slipped inside and closed the door softly behind me. The room smelled of scotch and cigars. I went straight to the painting of the hunt scene above the fireplace. I swung it aside. The safe was there. I held my breath. I didn't have the combination, but Harrison had told me to look for the override key. Raymond was lazy. He often kept the emergency key taped under his desk drawer. I dropped to my knees and felt under the mahogany desk. My fingers brushed against something metallic. Got it. I opened the safe. Inside, stacked neatly, were the papers that would end my father's career. I saw the loan agreements with the exorbitant interest rates. I saw the offshore account statements. And there, right on top, was the contract for the sale of the Southside house. It was dated for tonight. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I began snapping photos of every page, the forged signature of Hattie Brooks, the clause that gave Trey a 20% cut, the hidden addendum that transferred ownership to a shell company owned by Jessica's father. Click, click, click. I was capturing the evidence of their betrayal page by sickening page. I was so focused on getting a clear shot of the notary stamp that I didn't hear the footsteps approaching in the hallway. I didn't hear the doorknob turn. The door swung open. I froze. The phone was still in my hand, the safe wide open behind me. Trey stood in the doorway. He wasn't smiling anymore. His face was a mask of confusion that quickly twisted into suspicion. He looked at the safe. He looked at the papers scattered on the floor. And then he looked at me. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted, stepping into the room and slamming the door behind him. I shoved the phone into my apron pocket and stood up, backing away until my legs hit the desk. "Trey, I was just looking for a pen. Jessica asked for a pen." "Don't lie to me," he yelled, advancing on me. "You are taking pictures. You are spying on us." He lunged for me. I tried to dodge, but he was faster. He grabbed my wrist, twisting it painfully. "Give me the phone, Jasmine. Give it to me, or I swear to God I will break your arm." The air in the room was electric with violence. I looked into my brother's eyes and saw real fear. He knew. He knew that whatever was on my phone could destroy his easy life. "Let go of me," I screamed, kicking him in the shin. He grunted but didn't let go. He wrestled me toward the desk, trying to pry my fingers open. The phone slipped from my grasp and clattered onto the hardwood floor, sliding just out of reach. Trey dove for it. I scrambled over the desk, desperate to stop him. But as his hand closed around my phone, a voice boomed from the doorway. "What is going on in here?" We both froze. Raymond was standing there, a towel wrapped around his waist, water dripping from his hair. He looked from the open safe to Trey, holding my phone, and finally to me, trembling in my oversized catering uniform. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time I saw true danger in them. "Give me that phone," Trey Raymond said calmly. "Let's see what your sister finds so interesting about my private business." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as Raymond extended his hand, waiting for Trey to hand over my phone. The device contained the photos of the fraudulent contract, the evidence that would send my father to prison. If he unlocked it, if he scrolled through the gallery, everything was over. We would lose the element of surprise, and Hattie's plan would crumble before it even began. I looked at Trey, then at Raymond, and I made a split-second decision. I decided to play the role they had written for me my entire life. I decided to play the victim. I let out a sob, burying my face in my hands, my shoulders shaking with exaggerated weeping. "I am sorry," I wailed, letting my voice crack with desperation. "I didn't mean to snoop. My back is killing me. The catering manager has had me lifting crates of champagne for 2 hours. I just came in here looking for Advil. I remembered you used to keep a bottle in the desk drawer." I looked up at them through my fingers, making sure my eyes looked wide and pathetic. "I just wanted the pain to stop so I could keep working. I need the money, Dad. Please." Raymond looked at me, and his expression shifted from suspicion to pure, unadulterated disgust. The tension in his shoulders relaxed. To him, the story made perfect sense. In his world, I was weak. I was a failure. Of course, I wasn't a corporate spy. I was just a tired, broken servant looking for a handout. He laughed, a short barking sound that echoed in the wood-paneled room. "You are pathetic, Jasmine." Raymond sneered, tightening the towel around his waist. "You break into my private study because your back hurts. You really are not cut out for hard work, are you?" He looked at Trey and nodded at the desk. "Check the drawer. Give her the pills and get her out of here. She is staining the carpet with those cheap shoes." Trey smirked, the fear leaving his eyes. He opened the top drawer and rattled a bottle of ibuprofen. He didn't hand it to me. He tossed it at me. The plastic bottle hit my chest and fell to the floor. "Take two and get back to the kitchen," Trey said, kicking my phone across the floor toward me. "And if I catch you in here again, I will have security throw you out into the snow with your grandmother." I scrambled to pick up the phone and the pills, muttering apologies like a frightened child. "Thank you," I whispered, clutching the phone to my chest as if it were a lifeline. "Thank you so much." I backed out of the room, keeping my head bowed until the heavy door clicked shut. The moment I was alone in the hallway, the tears stopped. My posture straightened. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my oversized uniform and checked the phone. The photos were safe. They had bought the lie because it confirmed their own bias. Their arrogance was their blind spot, and I was standing right in the middle of it. I hurried back to the service area, slipping into a small dark pantry where the dry goods were stored. I needed to hear what was happening. I pulled out the small earpiece paired with the recording device I had planted under the console table in the hallway. I pressed it into my ear and waited. At first, there was only the sound of distant chatter. Then I heard Raymond's voice, loud and clear. He must have been standing right next to the table. "Yes," Mr. Sterling Raymond was saying, his tone dripping with false charm. "Everything is proceeding exactly as planned. The deed transfer is ready for your signature tonight." There was a pause as the other person spoke, but I could only hear Raymond's side of the conversation. "My mother," Raymond laughed, and the sound made my blood run cold. "Oh, you don't need to worry about Hattie. The poor woman is in the final stages of dementia. She is practically a vegetable. She doesn't even know her own name, let alone the value of real estate. I am her sole guardian and beneficiary. Selling this land is really a mercy. It will pay for the specialized care she needs in her final days." "Liar," I hissed into the darkness of the pantry. He was selling her legacy to pay his gambling debts and calling it mercy. He was declaring her dead while she was very much alive and preparing to destroy him. I pocketed the earpiece and stepped back into the chaotic kitchen. The head chef grabbed my arm before I could take a breath. "You," he barked, pointing at a tray of red wine glasses. "Table 4 needs a refill. Move it." I grabbed the heavy tray and pushed through the swinging doors into the ballroom. The transformation was breathtaking. The room was bathed in golden light, filled with people wearing tuxedos and gowns that cost more than I made in a year. A string quartet was playing softly in the corner. I moved through the crowd, invisible in my uniform, offering wine to people who didn't even look at my face. I was making my way toward the back of the room when I felt a hand grab my elbow. I turned to see Jessica standing there. She looked stunning in a silver sequined gown, but her eyes were venomous. She was holding a mostly empty glass of wine, and she was smiling. "Well, if it isn't the maid," she said loudly enough for the nearby circle of guests to hear. "I hope you are not drinking on the job, Jasmine." "I am just working, Jessica," I said quietly, trying to pull away. "Please let me do my job." "But you are so clumsy," she said, her voice dropping to a mock whisper. "Remember how you dropped your life savings into a joint account with your daddy? Oops." Before I could react, she tilted her hand. The remaining red wine in her glass splashed across the front of my white catering jacket. It soaked through instantly, a dark blood-like stain spreading across my chest. "Oh no," Jessica gasped theatrically, bringing a hand to her mouth. "Look what you did." "You are such a mess, Jasmine. You can't even hold a tray straight." The guests around us chuckled. A few of them looked at me with pity, but most just looked annoyed that a servant had caused a scene. I stood there, the cold wine seeping into my skin, the humiliation burning my face. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the entire tray of glasses at her perfect smiling face. But I remembered Hattie's voice. "Think like a general." I took a deep breath. I lowered my head. "I am so sorry, ma'am," I said, my voice steady. "I will go clean up." "You do that?" Jessica sneered, turning her back on me. "And try not to ruin anything else tonight." I walked away, the laughter of the crowd fading behind me. I didn't go to the bathroom to clean up. I went to the side entrance of the ballroom, the spot where the shadows were deepest. I stood there stained and silent watching the stage. The music swelled. The lights dimmed, leaving a single spotlight focused on the podium at the center of the stage. Raymond walked out waving to the applause. He looked triumphant. He looked untouchable. He adjusted the microphone, flashing his whitened teeth at the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Raymond boomed, his voice amplified across the hall. "Thank you for joining me on this historic night. For 50 years, the Brooks family has been a pillar of this community. And tonight, I am thrilled to announce the next chapter. I am about to sign a partnership that will transform the South Side and secure our legacy for generations to come." He gestured to a table beside the podium where a legal team sat with a stack of documents. The fake contract. The one I had photographed. The one he was about to sign. I glanced at my watch. It was exactly 8 o'clock. Raymond picked up a gold pen. He held it up to the light, savoring the moment. With this signature, he declared, "I am not just selling land. I am building the future." He leaned over the document. The tip of the pen hovered millimeters above the paper. I held my breath. The double doors at the back of the ballroom, the grand entrance that had been closed all night, suddenly rattled. Raymond didn't hear it. He was too focused on his victory. But I heard it, and I smiled. Because the future he was talking about was about to walk through those doors and hit him like a freight train. The grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hotel was a cathedral of gold leaf and crystal, a place where the air itself seemed to cost money. Waiters in white gloves moved like silent ghosts through the crowd, carrying silver trays laden with champagne flutes that sparkled under the massive chandeliers. I stood in the shadow of a velvet curtain near the service entrance, my stained catering jacket buttoned all the way up to my chin to hide the red wine Jessica had thrown on me earlier. From my vantage point, I could see the entire ecosystem of greed that my father had cultivated. These were the movers and shakers of Chicago, the people who signed checks with commas and looked right through people like me. And at the center of it all stood Raymond. He was holding court near the ice sculpture, one hand in his pocket, the other gesturing expansively as he spoke to a group of potential investors. He looked immaculate in his bespoke tuxedo, his hair slicked back, his smile wide and practiced. Beside him, Jessica shimmered in her silver gown, playing the role of the devoted trophy wife to perfection. She laughed at all the right moments, touching his arm possessively, completely unaware that the man she was clinging to was technically homeless and millions of dollars in debt. They looked like the perfect power couple. It was nauseating. I pressed my hand against the small earpiece in my ear, checking the connection one last time. Harrison had told me to wait for the signal. The signal was simple. Raymond had to be on stage. He had to be at the very precipice of his lie before we pushed him off. The lights in the ballroom dimmed, casting the crowd into a soft, expectant twilight. A spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the podium at the front of the room. The chatter died down, replaced by a polite ripple of applause as my father walked onto the stage. He didn't just walk, he strutted. He gripped the sides of the podium, looking out at the sea of faces with a hunger that made my skin crawl. He adjusted the microphone, letting the silence stretch out for a dramatic beat. "Welcome, friends, colleagues, and visionaries." Raymond began, his voice booming through the high-end sound system. "Tonight is not just a celebration of business. It is a celebration of heritage." I felt a bile rise in my throat. Heritage. The man who had thrown his mother's suitcase into a snowbank was talking about heritage. He continued, his voice dropping to a somber, reverent tone that he must have rehearsed in the mirror. "You all know the story of the Brooks family. My mother, Hattie, was a woman of simple means. She worked hard to buy a small plot of land on the south side, a humble home, a home that sadly has fallen into disrepair as her health has declined." He paused, wiping a non-existent tear from his eye. Jessica dabbed at her eyes with a napkin in the front row. The performance was Oscar-worthy. "It breaks my heart to see her legacy crumble," Raymond said, shaking his head. "But sometimes, love means letting go." Sometimes honoring our parents means making the hard decisions they can no longer make for themselves. My mother is, as many of you know, in the final stages of dementia. She is not with us tonight because she is resting in a specialized facility where she can receive the care she so desperately needs. I squeezed my hands into fists so tight my fingernails dug into my palms. He was erasing her. He was painting her as a senile invalid to justify stealing her life's work. So Raymond said, his voice brightening, swelling with false optimism. It is with a heavy heart, but a hopeful spirit, that I announce the sale of the Brooks estate. This isn't just a sale. It is a transformation. Where that old rotting house now stands, we will build a commercial center that will revitalize the entire neighborhood. We are turning the past into the future. And I know if my mother were in her right mind, she would be smiling down on us tonight. The crowd erupted in applause. They clapped for his bravery. They clapped for his vision. They had no idea they were clapping for a monster. Meanwhile, 20 floors below on the street outside the hotel, a different kind of scene was unfolding. The blizzard had intensified, but the line of black Cadillac Escalades idling at the curb didn't move. The lead vehicle's door opened. A security guard held a large black umbrella against the driving snow. Hattie Mae Brooks stepped out. She didn't wait for the wheelchair lift. She didn't reach for the arm of the guard. Instead, she reached for a cane made of polished ebony with a silver handle. She set it firmly on the pavement. Click. For 5 years, she had done her physical therapy in secret in the early hours of the morning, while the rest of the house slept. She had pushed through the pain, rebuilding her muscles, waiting for the moment when she would need to stand tall. That moment was now. She wore a floor-length coat of midnight blue wool and diamonds that caught the streetlights like shards of ice. She looked up at the towering hotel, her eyes narrowing. She took a step, then another. Her gait was slow, but it was steady. It was the march of a queen returning to reclaim her throne. Behind her, Harrison and a phalanx of 10 lawyers fell into step. They moved through the revolving doors of the lobby like a storm front, silencing the casual conversations of the guests in the foyer. Back in the ballroom, the applause was fading. Raymond gestured to the side of the stage. And now, to make it official, I invite Mr. Sterling of Sterling Development to join me. Let's sign the papers and open the champagne. A man in a gray suit walked onto the stage carrying a leather portfolio. He laid the contract on the podium. This was it, the moment of no return. I watched from the shadows, my heart pounding in my ears. Raymond picked up the gold pen. He unscrewed the cap, savoring the weight of it. He looked at Jessica in the front row and winked. She blew him a kiss. Raymond leaned over the document. The tip of the pen hovered over the signature line. The room went silent, anticipating the scratch of ink on paper that would seal the deal. I looked at my watch. 3, 2, 1. Suddenly, a loud, heavy thud echoed through the ballroom. Then another. It sounded like a gavel striking a sounding block. Thud, thud, thud. Raymond looked up, annoyed. The sound was coming from the double doors at the very back of the room, the doors that had been locked all night. Then darkness. Every light in the ballroom cut out simultaneously. The chandeliers went black. The spotlight died. The room was plunged into pitch blackness. Gasps and screams erupted from the crowd. I heard glass breaking as someone dropped a drink. Raymond's voice rang out in the dark, high and panicked. "What is going on? Get the backup generator running. Who turned off the lights?" Then a sound cut through the panic. It was the screech of feedback from the microphone system, followed by a voice. But it wasn't Raymond's voice. And it wasn't coming from the stage. It was coming from everywhere. It was coming from the main speakers, loud, clear, and terrifyingly familiar. "Put the pen down, Raymond." The room froze. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. "That contract is void," the voice continued, echoing off the high ceilings, "because you cannot sell what you do not own." A single beam of light cut through the darkness from the back of the room. It wasn't a spotlight. It was a high-powered tactical flashlight held by a security guard. The beam hit the double doors. They swung open with a crash, and there, framed in the white light, standing on her own 2 feet, was the woman Raymond had left to die in the snow. The return of the lights was more shocking than the darkness had been. When the main breakers were flipped back on, the crystal chandeliers didn't just flicker, they exploded with brilliance, flooding every corner of the ballroom with a harsh, unforgiving illumination. There were no shadows left to hide in. The sudden brightness forced everyone to squint, shielding their eyes. But as vision returned, 500 pairs of eyes were drawn to a single point at the back of the room. The double doors, which had been swung wide open, framed a tableau that looked less like reality and more like a scene from a vengeance mythology. My grandmother, Hattie Mae Brooks, stood at the center of the threshold. She was not the slumped, fragile woman in a wheelchair that Raymond had described to his investors just moments ago. She was standing upright, her spine straight as a steel rod, her weight resting lightly on an ebony cane topped with a silver hawk. She wore a midnight blue velvet coat that swept the floor, and around her neck hung a string of South Sea pearls that were worth more than the mortgage Raymond had just tried to secure. And standing next to her was me. I was no longer the invisible servant in a wine-stained uniform. During the chaos of the blackout, under the cover of the confusion and guided by Harrison's security team, I had shed the catering whites. I was now wearing the dress Hattie had brought for me, a vintage Givenchy gown of black silk that fit like armor. My hair was down, my chin was up, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking at the floor. I was looking directly at the stage. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of everyone's lungs. Then a sound shattered the quiet. Smash. On the stage, the crystal champagne flute slipped from Raymond's fingers. It hit the parquet floor, exploding into 1,000 shards, the expensive vintage liquid soaking into his polished shoes. He didn't seem to notice. His mouth was hanging open, his face draining of color, until he looked like a wax figure melting under the stage lights. He stared at his mother as if he were seeing a ghost. Next to him, Jessica let out a strangled gasp. Her hand flew to her throat, clutching her diamond necklace. She looked from me to Hattie, and I saw the gears in her mind grinding to a halt. The math wasn't adding up. The narrative she had built, the story of the superior wife and the pathetic in-laws, was crumbling in real time. Hattie took a step forward, then another. The tap of her cane on the marble floor of the entryway echoed like a gunshot. Tap, tap, tap. The crowd parted. These were the wealthiest people in Chicago, people who didn't move for anyone, but they scrambled to get out of her way like the Red Sea parting for Moses. They whispered behind their hands, their eyes darting from the powerful woman walking down the aisle to the terrified man on the stage. Raymond finally found his voice. It was high-thinned by panic and desperate. "Security," he shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at us. "Security, get in here! That woman is a patient. She has escaped from a mental facility. She is dangerous." He looked wildly around the room, trying to make eye contact with the investors, trying to sell the lie one last time. "I apologize, everyone," he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "My mother, she has severe dementia. She gets violent. She doesn't know where she is. Please, somebody escort her out before she hurts herself." He was gaslighting an entire room. He was trying to rewrite reality even as it stood staring him in the face. It was pathetic, and it was infuriating. I stepped forward to speak, but Harrison, the lead attorney, moved faster. He stepped out from the phalanx of lawyers behind us, his voice booming without the need for a microphone. "Mr. Brooks Harrison," said, his tone dripping with legal authority, "I would advise you to stop speaking immediately." Raymond blinked, confused. "Who are you? I didn't hire you." "Get off my stage. I am Arthur Harrison, senior partner at Sterling Cooper," Vance Harrison announced. A murmur went through the crowd. Everyone knew that firm. They didn't represent patients escaping nursing homes. They represented billionaires. "And you are correct, Mr. Brooks. You did not hire me," Harrison continued, walking calmly toward the stage. "I represent the owner of this property, and the owner of the house you slept in last night, and incidentally the owner of the building we are currently standing in." Raymond laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "What are you talking about? I am the owner. I am signing the papers right now. Harrison stopped at the foot of the stage. He looked up at Raymond with a mixture of pity and professional disdain. No, sir, you are a tenant. And as of this moment, you are a trespasser. Trespasser, Raymond sputtered. This is my mother. I have power of attorney. She is incompetent. Look at her. He gestured wildly at Hattie, who had now reached the front row. She stopped. She looked up at the son she had raised, the son who had thrown her away. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small remote control. Raymond, she said. Her voice wasn't amplified, but in the silent room it carried to the rafters. It was calm, clear, and devastatingly sane. You have spent all night telling these good people a story. You told them I was sick. You told them I was a burden. You told them you were a hero. She pointed the remote at the massive LED screen behind him, the one that still displayed the slide titled The Brooks Legacy. I think it is time we told them the truth, she said. She pressed the button. The screen flickered. The slide of the smiling family photo vanished. In its place, grainy black and white footage appeared. It was time-stamped, December 24th, 7:30 p.m. A collective gasp went through the room. The image was undeniable. It was the front porch of the colonial mansion. The snow was falling heavily. The camera angle was high, capturing the scene perfectly. On the screen, the front door flew open. A figure, clearly Raymond in his expensive sweater, shoved a wheelchair onto the icy porch. The woman in the chair nearly tipped over. "Oh my God," someone in the front row whispered. The video continued. The audience watched in horrified silence as on-screen Raymond grabbed his daughter by the arm and threw her out into the blizzard. They watched him pick up a suitcase and hurl it into a snowbank. They saw his face twisted with rage as he screamed something that the camera's microphone picked up clearly. "Don't come back until you learn your place." The Raymond on the screen slammed the door, leaving two women to freeze. The video froze on that final frame, the closed door, and the old woman huddled under a thin coat in the snow. Hattie lowered the remote. She looked at the audience, then back at Raymond, who was staring at the screen, his face a mask of absolute horror. "That," Hattie said, her voice cutting through the stunned atmosphere like a blade, "is your legacy, Raymond. And tonight, I am here to collect the rent." The video on the massive LED screen continued to play a loop of cruelty broadcast in high definition. Every person in the ballroom watched in horrified fascination as the Raymond on the screen shoveled snow onto his mother's suitcase. The contrast between the man in the video screaming at a helpless old woman and the man standing on stage in a tuxedo preaching about family values was so stark, it was physically nauseating. The silence in the room broke. It didn't break with applause this time, but with a low, rumbling murmur of disgust that swelled into open outrage. I watched my father. He was frozen, his eyes darting back and forth between the screen and the audience, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. He raised his hands, trying to shield himself from the projection, as if he could physically block the truth from coming out. But the light from the screen washed over him, casting him in the cold blue glow of the blizzard he had created. Mr. Sterling, the wealthy developer who had been seconds away from signing the deal, stepped back from the podium as if Raymond were radioactive. He looked at the contract lying on the stand, then up at the screen, and finally at Hattie standing tall in the aisle. He didn't say a word. He simply reached out, picked up the thick stack of legal documents, and ripped them in half. The sound of the heavy paper tearing echoed through the room, sharp and final. He threw the pieces onto the floor at Raymond's feet, turned his back, and walked off the stage without looking back. That was the first domino. I stepped forward, moving to the center of the aisle next to my grandmother. I held up the tablet I had been given by the forensic accountants. My voice, empowered by the microphone Harrison handed me, rang out clear and steady. "It is not just about the eviction," I said, looking directly at the investors who had funded my father's lifestyle. "It is about the theft." I tapped the screen, and the image on the main projector changed. Gone was the video of the snow. In its place was a spreadsheet. Rows and columns of red numbers illuminated the room. For the past 5 years, Raymond Brooks has been systematically draining the family accounts I explained walking slowly toward the stage. He claimed he was managing my grandmother's pension. Instead, he funneled over $500,000 into online gambling sites and offshore shell companies. I swiped to the next slide. It showed the property deed to the mansion. And this house. The one he claims is his legacy. He has mortgaged it 3 times behind the owner's back. He forged Hattie Brooks's signature on 3 separate occasions to secure loans from predatory lenders. He doesn't own this estate. He owes more on it than it is worth. He is not a tycoon. He is a bankrupt fraud who evicted his own mother to hide his crimes. The crowd gasped. I saw former friends of my parents turning away whispering, checking their phones, distancing themselves from the sinking ship. Raymond's face turned a shade of gray I had never seen before. He gripped the podium, his knuckles white, looking like he was about to vomit. Then a shriek cut through the air. Liar. It was Jessica. She had climbed onto the stage, her silver dress shimmering under the harsh lights. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure panic. She wasn't defending her husband. She was defending her lifestyle. She pointed a manicured finger at Hattie. "This is a trick," she screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "Look at her. She is standing up. She has been in a wheelchair for 5 years. She told us she was paralyzed." Jessica turned to the crowd, her eyes wide and manic. "Don't you see? She is the liar. She is the fraud. She has been faking it this whole time to spy on us. How can you trust a woman who lies about being crippled just to manipulate her own son?" The room went quiet again. It was a valid point, a desperate Hail Mary to shift the narrative. All eyes turned to Hattie. My grandmother didn't flinch. She didn't look at Jessica with anger. She looked at her with pity. She took a step forward, the tap of her cane echoing on the marble. She brought the microphone to her lips. "You are right, Jessica," Hattie said, her voice calm and commanding. "I could have walked years ago, but I stayed in that chair." Do you want to know why Hattie looked at Raymond, then at Trey, and finally back at Jessica? Because when you are standing, people perform for you. They show you their best faces. They smile. They bow. But when you are down, when they think you are weak, when they think you are broken and helpless, that is when they show you who they really are. She took another step, her gaze hardening into steel. "I stayed in that chair because it was the only way to see the knives you were hiding behind your backs. I only played the part of the cripple because I needed to see the true face of the vultures circling my legacy. And tonight I have seen enough." Hattie signaled to Harrison. The lawyer opened his briefcase and pulled out a single pristine document. He walked up the stairs to the stage and placed it on the podium, right on top of the torn contract. "This," Hattie announced, her voice booming, "is my last will and testament." It was updated this morning at 9 a.m. She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "Previously, my estate was to be divided equally among my descendants. But in light of the attempted murder of a vulnerable elder, because let's call throwing me into a blizzard what it is, and the systematic embezzlement of my funds, I have made some changes." I looked at the screen. The new breakdown of the assets appeared. A pie chart showed one massive blue section and 2 tiny microscopic slivers. The Hattie Mae Trust, valued at $3.6 billion, is hereby transferred in its entirety to a revocable living trust under the sole control of my granddaughter, Jasmine Brooks. I felt my knees go weak. I knew it was coming, but hearing it out loud in front of the people who had treated me like a servant was overwhelming. "As for Raymond Brooks and Trey Brooks," Hattie continued, her voice turning to ice, "you are hereby disinherited. However, I am a generous woman. I have left you each a specific bequest." She pointed to the screen. The number $1 appeared next to their names. $1, she said? "So that you cannot claim I forgot you. I remembered you perfectly. I remembered every insult, every theft, and every moment of cruelty. This dollar is your payment for the show you put on tonight." Trey slumped against the wall, sliding down to the floor, his head in his hands. He realized in that moment that his loyalty to his father had cost him a fortune. Raymond stood motionless, staring at the screen, his entire world incinerating in front of his eyes. Jessica let out a wail, grabbing Raymond's arm and shaking him. "Do something, fix this. You said we were rich." But before Raymond could answer, before he could spin one more lie, a new sound pierced the atmosphere of the ballroom. It started faint, but grew louder rapidly, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Wail, wail, wail. Blue and red lights began to flash against the high windows of the ballroom, pulsing in time with the sirens. Hattie looked at her son one last time, a look of finality on her face. "I told you, Raymond," she said softly into the microphone. "I didn't come here to argue. I came here to collect. And it sounds like your ride is here." The party was over, literally and metaphorically. The sirens that had been wailing in the distance suddenly cut off, replaced by the heavy rhythmic thud of boots hitting the marble floor of the lobby outside. The guests in the ballroom, who had just minutes ago been sipping champagne and celebrating my father's supposed business acumen, now scattered like roaches when the kitchen light is turned on. They pressed themselves against the velvet-covered walls, desperate to distance themselves from the man standing on the stage. Raymond Brooks, the man who had terrified me for 29 years, looked small. He looked deflated. The arrogance that had fueled him all night had evaporated, leaving behind a sweating, trembling shell of a man. He gripped the podium not for authority, but because his legs were giving out. A squad of 6 police officers marched into the ballroom. They didn't look at the crystal chandeliers or the horrified socialites. They walked in a V formation straight down the center aisle, led by a detective in a cheap suit who looked like he had seen enough corruption to last a lifetime. Raymond tried to straighten his tie, a reflex of vanity that looked pathetic in the face of impending doom. "Officers," he called out, his voice cracking. "Thank God you are here. My mother is having an episode. She is disturbing the peace. Please remove her." The detective didn't even slow down. He walked right past Hattie, giving a respectful nod to the lawyer, Harrison, and stepped onto the stage. He pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. The metal caught the harsh light of the room, shining with a terrifying finality. Raymond Brooks, the detective, said, his voice loud enough to carry to the back of the room without a microphone. "You are under arrest." "For what?" Raymond shrieked, backing away until he hit the screen that was still displaying his crimes. "This is a misunderstanding. I am a pillar of this community. You are under arrest for first-degree forgery, financial exploitation of an elderly person, and grand larceny," the detective recited, grabbing Raymond's wrist and twisting it behind his back. "We also have a warrant for wire fraud regarding the mortgage applications you submitted on a property you do not own." The click of the handcuffs locking into place was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my freedom. It was the sound of justice. Raymond began to struggle, not physically but verbally. He looked out at the crowd, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He saw his investors shaking their heads. He saw his friends turning their backs. And then he saw Jessica. Jessica was standing at the edge of the stage, freezing, looking for an exit. Raymond's face twisted into a mask of pure, cowardly desperation. He wasn't going to go down alone. He was a narcissist, and narcissists never take the blame. "It wasn't me," Raymond screamed, thrashing against the officer's grip. "It was her. It was Jessica." The room gasped. Jessica froze, her eyes widening in disbelief. "She made me do it," Raymond yelled, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat and the humiliation. "She is the one who wanted the renovations. She is the one who wanted the new car. She told me to sell the house. She said my mother was a vegetable and wouldn't notice. I only did it to make her happy. She is the mastermind." He was throwing his own wife to the wolves to save his skin. It was pathetic. It was disgusting. And it was exactly who he was. Jessica screamed back, her voice shrill and piercing. "You lying coward! You told me you were rich. You told me the money was yours. Do not drag me into your mess." The detective signaled to 2 female officers. "Grab her too. We have evidence she was complicit in the wire fraud transfers. Her name is on the shell company accounts." As the officers moved toward Jessica, I felt a hand on my arm. I turned to see Trey. My little brother, the golden boy. He looked like a child who had gotten lost in a shopping mall. His tuxedo was disheveled, his face pale. He looked at the police arresting our father, then at Hattie standing like a statue of judgment, and finally at me. Jasmine, he whispered, his voice trembling. You have to stop this. Talk to Grandma. Tell her to drop the charges. I looked at him, feeling a dull ache in my chest. Even now, he didn't get it. I can't stop this, Trey, I said quietly. They broke the law. But Dad is going to jail. Trey pleaded, grabbing my hand. And what about me? Grandma cut me out of the will. She left me $1, Jasmine. $1. How am I supposed to live? I have debts. I have people looking for me. He squeezed my hand tighter, his eyes filling with tears. You are my sister. You have always taken care of me. Fix this, please. I was just doing what Dad told me. I didn't know any better. I looked at his hand gripping mine. For years that grip had been a shackle. I had covered for his mistakes. I had paid his parking tickets. I had lied to his girlfriends. I had been his safety net because my parents told me that was my job. But tonight the net was gone. I pulled my hand away. You are 26 years old, Trey, I said, my voice cold and steady. You are not a child. You stood there and laughed while Dad threw us out into the snow. You watched me scrub your shoes tonight and called me a good girl. You knew exactly what you were doing. But I am family, he cried. No, I said, stepping back to stand next to Hattie. You were family when it was convenient for you. Now you are just a man facing the consequences of his own actions. Grow up, Trey. And good luck with the bookies. Trey stared at me, his mouth open, realizing for the first time in his life that no one was coming to save him. He slumped against the wall, sliding down to the floor, weeping into his hands. On the other side of the stage, the scene had turned chaotic. Jessica was not going quietly. As the female officers grabbed her arms, she began to kick and scream, losing all semblance of the sophisticated socialite she pretended to be. Get your hands off me, she screeched, her silver dress tearing at the shoulder. Do you know who my father is? He will sue this entire department. The officers ignored her threats, dragging her toward the stairs. They were professional, efficient, and tired of her noise. Desperation took over. Jessica realized her threats weren't working. She realized Raymond had betrayed her. She realized the money was gone. She needed a trump card. She needed something that would make them stop, something that would force them to treat her with caution. She dug her heels into the carpet, fighting with the strength of a cornered animal. Stop! She screamed, her voice hitting a pitch that shattered the remaining tension in the room. You cannot arrest me! You cannot touch me! The officers paused for a fraction of a second, startled by her intensity. I am pregnant! Jessica yelled, throwing her head back, her chest heaving. The entire room went silent. Raymond stopped crying and looked at her. Trey looked up from the floor. Even Hattie raised an eyebrow. I am pregnant with the heir to the Brooks family. Jessica sobbed, collapsing to her knees, playing the victim with everything she had left. If you stress me out, I could lose the baby. You have to let me go. I need a doctor. It was a brilliant move. It was the ultimate shield. Who would drag a pregnant woman to jail? Who would risk harming an unborn child? The detective looked at his officers, hesitating. Procedure dictated caution with pregnant suspects. I watched Jessica on her knees, weeping, cradling her stomach protectively. It looked so real. It sounded so heartbreaking. But then I looked at Hattie. My grandmother wasn't looking at Jessica's stomach. She was looking at Harrison, her lawyer, and on her face there wasn't an ounce of concern. There was only the ghost of a smile. She leaned over to me and whispered 3 words that sent a chill down my spine. Checkmate, my dear. She knew. I didn't know how, but she knew. Jessica had just played her final card, but she had no idea that Hattie had been counting the deck the entire time. The bluff was spectacular, but the fall was going to be lethal. The ballroom was frozen in a tableau of high drama. Jessica was on her knees clutching her stomach, tears streaming down her face as she played the role of the terrified, expectant mother to perfection. The police officers who had been seconds away from dragging her out hesitated. In our society, the claim of pregnancy is a powerful shield, and Jessica knew exactly how to wield it. She looked up at the detective through her eyelashes, her breathing ragged, waiting for the sympathy that always saved her. Raymond, even in handcuffs, looked relieved. He saw a lifeline. If Jessica was pregnant, maybe the courts would be lenient. Maybe they could delay the trial. Maybe there was a future heir to bargain with. But I wasn't looking at Jessica. I was looking at Harrison, who was calmly opening a manila folder he had pulled from his briefcase. He walked over to me and handed me a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a contract. It was a medical record obtained legally through the discovery phase of the forensic audit regarding the misuse of family health insurance funds. I walked toward the edge of the stage, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor. I held the paper up. "Officer," I said, my voice cutting through Jessica's theatrical sobbing. "Before you call a paramedic, you might want to see this." The detective stepped forward and took the paper from my hand. He scanned it, his eyebrows knitting together in confusion. Then his expression hardened. He looked down at Jessica with pure disgust. "What is this?" Jessica snapped, dropping the act for a split second. "It is a medical invoice from the Northwestern Fertility Clinic dated 3 years ago," I stated, addressing the entire room. "It is for a tubal ligation procedure, a voluntary sterilization." I looked at my brother Trey. He was standing near the wall, his face pale. "She isn't pregnant, Trey. She hasn't been able to get pregnant for 3 years. She lied to you to get a ring. She lied to get access to the trust fund. And she is lying now to stay out of jail." The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica stopped crying instantly. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking gray and aged under the harsh lights. Trey stared at his wife. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The son he thought he was protecting, the legacy he had betrayed his own sister for, it was all smoke and mirrors. He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You lied," Trey whispered, walking toward her. "You told me we were building a family. You made me ask Dad for more money for the nursery. You made me kick Jasmine out." "It doesn't matter," Jessica shrieked, scrambling backward as the female officer grabbed her arm again. "I did it for us. You did it for the money." Trey screamed, his voice breaking. "You are a monster!" The detective had heard enough. "Get her out of here," he ordered. As they dragged Jessica away, kicking and screaming obscenities that made the remaining socialites cover their ears, the detective turned to Raymond. "Mr. Brooks, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it." They hauled my father off the stage. He didn't look at me. He was staring at the floor, a broken man who had gambled everything on a lie and lost. But we weren't done yet. As the police cars sped away with Raymond and Jessica, Harrison turned his attention to Trey. My brother was still standing there looking lost, waiting for someone to tell him what to do. He looked at Hattie, his eyes filling with hope. "Grandma," he said, stepping forward. I didn't know. You saw that, right? She tricked me too. I am a victim here." Hattie looked at him. She didn't look angry. She looked tired. "You are a victim of your own greed, grandson," she said softly. Harrison stepped in. "Mr. Brooks, as per the terms of the trust activation, all assets previously used by your father and his dependents are now the property of the Hattie Mae Foundation. This includes the tuxedo you are wearing, which was paid for with a company credit card and the phone in your pocket." Trey blinked. "What? You are taking my clothes. We are taking company property," Harrison corrected. "And since you are no longer an employee or a beneficiary, you are trespassing." I watched as security guards escorted Trey to the cloakroom. They allowed him to keep the tuxedo pants and shirt, but they took the jacket, the watch, and the phone. He looked stripped, vulnerable, and pathetic. 10 minutes later, I stood at the service entrance of the hotel. The blizzard was still raging outside, the wind howling with the same ferocity as it had when my father threw me out. Raymond Jessica, who had been released on her own recognizance pending arraignment but was barred from the house, and Trey were standing on the sidewalk. They were shivering. The warmth of the hotel was behind them, and the cold reality of Chicago was in front of them. They had no car, the Escalades were ours. They had no cash, their accounts were frozen. They had no home, the locks had already been changed. They looked at me. For the first time, I was the one standing in the warmth, and they were the ones in the cold. Jasmine Trey chattered, hugging himself. "Please, I have nowhere to go. It is freezing. Just give me a ride. Just let me sleep on your couch." I looked at them. I remembered the way they laughed when I asked for help. I remembered the sound of the door locking. I reached into my clutch. I didn't pull out a checkbook. I didn't pull out a key. I pulled out 3 slips of paper and a coupon I had found in my purse from the night before. "Here," I said, handing them to Trey. He looked down. In his hand were 3 one-way bus tickets to the other side of town and a coupon for 15% off a night at the Motel 6. "It is a bit of a walk to the bus station," I said, my voice calm. "But if you hurry, you might beat the storm." "You can't do this," Jessica screamed, her mascara running down her face. "We are family." I looked at Hattie, who was watching from the window of the warm, waiting limousine. "No," I said, turning my back on them. "I have a family. You 3 are just people I used to know. Merry Christmas." I signaled the doorman. He closed the heavy steel door, shutting out their protests, shutting out the cold and shutting out the toxicity that had plagued my life for decades. I walked to the limo and climbed in next to Hattie. She patted my hand. "It is done," she said. "It is done," I agreed. We drove away, leaving them standing under the street lamp exactly where they deserved to be. Later that night, I was sitting in the penthouse watching the snow fall over the city. It looked beautiful from up here, safe and warm. My new phone buzzed on the coffee table. I picked it up. The screen displayed a notification from the Cook County Department of Corrections. "Incoming collect call from inmate Raymond Brooks. Press 1 to accept." I stared at the screen. I could imagine him in the holding cell wearing an orange jumpsuit, terrified, finally ready to apologize, finally ready to beg. He probably wanted me to call a lawyer. He probably wanted to tell me he loved me. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt peace. I pressed the block caller button. The phone went silent. I set it down, took a sip of hot tea, and turned to my grandmother. "Who was it?" Hattie asked, not looking up from her book. "Wrong number." I smiled. The storm outside was finally breaking, and for the first time in 29 years, the forecast for my life was perfectly clear. 1 year. 365 days. That is how long it has been since the night the lights went out at the Palmer House Hotel, and my former life shattered into a million pieces. As I stand in the corner office of the newly constructed Hattie Holdings headquarters, looking out over the Chicago skyline, the view is very different from the one I saw from the window of the Motel 6. The blizzard that nearly killed us is a distant memory, replaced by the warm golden glow of a winter sunset reflecting off the glass of the skyscrapers. I smoothed the front of my blazer and looked down at the documents on my desk. They were the blueprints for the Hattie May residence, a state-of-the-art affordable housing complex for low-income seniors. It was being built on the very land my father had tried to steal, the land where the old South Side house once stood. We didn't sell it to a developer to build a mall. We tore down the rotting structure and built a sanctuary. It was my grandmother's dream, and now as the executive director of the foundation, I was making it a reality. I wasn't just a sous chef anymore. I was a builder. My assistant knocked softly on the glass door. "Ms. Brooks," she said, "the car is ready for the holiday dinner, and Mr. Harrison left this update for you." She handed me a thin manila envelope. I knew what was inside. It was the monthly report on the assets we had liquidated, specifically the human assets. I opened the file in the car as we drove through the festive streets. The first page was a status update from the Illinois State Penitentiary. Raymond Brooks was 12 months into his 8-year sentence for fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. The report noted that his appeals had been denied. It also mentioned that he had stopped trying to call me. Apparently, after 6 months of silence, he finally realized that the daughter he had underestimated was the one person who would never pick up the phone again. He was working in the prison laundry folding sheets for 12 cents an hour. It was a poetic justice that I tried not to savor too much, but I admit it brought a small smile to my face. I flipped the page. Trey, my little brother, the golden child who thought the world owed him a living. The photo attached to his file was grainy, taken from a distance by a private investigator we kept on retainer to ensure he stayed away from the foundation. He was standing outside a car wash on the west side holding a spray hose. His tuxedo was gone, replaced by a wet gray jumpsuit. His hands were red and chapped from the cold water and harsh chemicals. He looked older. He looked tired. Harrison's notes indicated that Jessica had divorced him the moment the money dried up, leaving him with half of their accumulated debt. He was living in a studio apartment above a garage, learning for the first time in his life what it meant to earn $1. And Jessica. The last page was brief. After the fake pregnancy scandal and the public humiliation at the gala, she had become a social pariah in Chicago. No charity would let her on their board. No country club would renew her membership. She had moved back to her parents' home in Wisconsin, where she was reportedly working as a receptionist at her father's dental practice, far away from the high society life she had clawed so hard to attain. I closed the file and looked out the window. They were gone. The toxicity, the manipulation, the constant need to prove my worth to people who were incapable of loving me, it was all gone. The limousine pulled up to the curb, but it wasn't the curb of the cold, imposing colonial mansion. It was the entrance to a beautiful brownstone in Lincoln Park, the new home I shared with Hattie. I walked inside and the smell hit me instantly. Not the smell of fear or tension, but the smell of roasted sage, cranberry sauce, and expensive red wine. The house was decorated simply, but elegantly, with a real tree standing in the corner, covered in ornaments that Hattie and I had picked out together. In the dining room, the table was set. But there were no place cards. There was no hierarchy. Hattie sat at the head of the table, not in a wheelchair, but in a comfortable armchair. She looked healthy. Her cheeks were pink, her eyes bright with laughter. Sitting around her were not sycophants or fake friends. There was Harrison, who had taken off his suit jacket and was currently trying to carve the turkey. There was Marcus, the head of security, who had saved us that night, laughing as he poured wine for the guests. There were 2 of the nurses who helped care for Hattie and the head chef from my old restaurant, whom I had hired to run the kitchen at the new senior center. Jasmine, Hattie called out when she saw me. "Come here, darling. Harrison is butchering this poor bird. We need a professional." I laughed, the sound bubbling up from my chest, light and free. I walked over and kissed my grandmother on the cheek. "Merry Christmas, Grandma," I whispered. "Merry Christmas." "Madam CEO," she winked back. As I took the carving knife and looked around the table, I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fireplace. I looked at these people. They didn't share my blood. They didn't have the name Brooks. But they were loyal. They were kind. They were the ones who had stood by us when the world fell apart. We ate, we drank, we told stories. There were no insults disguised as jokes. There was no walking on eggshells. There was just peace. Later that night, after the guests had left and the fire was dying down to embers, Hattie and I sat on the sofa watching the snow fall outside the window. It looked beautiful now, soft and quiet, no longer a threat. "You know," Hattie said, taking a sip of tea, "I lost a son last year." I looked at her, my heart aching slightly. "Do you miss him?" "I miss who I thought he was," she said honestly. "But I gained a daughter. And I gained a legacy that actually means something. I would make that trade again in a heartbeat." She reached out and squeezed my hand, her grip strong and reassuring. "This is what winning looks like, Jasmine. It isn't the money. It isn't the buildings. It is this. Sitting here unafraid. Being loved for who you are, not what you can give. I nodded, resting my head on her shoulder. To the audience watching this, I want you to remember something. I spent 29 years thinking I was worthless because my family treated me that way. I thought I had to earn their love by being a servant in my own home. I was wrong. Family is not DNA. Family is not the name on your birth certificate. Family are the people who hold the umbrella when the rain starts to fall. Family are the people who pull you out of the snowbank when everyone else drives by. Do not ever let anyone define your worth, even if that person is your father or your mother. If you are in a situation where love feels like a transaction, walk away. It will be the hardest thing you ever do, but I promise you on the other side of that door, there is a life waiting for you that is bigger, brighter, and happier than you can imagine. My name is Jasmine Brooks. I was a victim, I was a survivor, and now I am the CEO of my own destiny. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, if you have ever had to cut ties to save your soul, please hit the like button and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to know that they are not alone. Remember, the best revenge is not destroying your enemies. It is living a life so beautiful that they don't even exist in your world anymore.